So welcome to saxophone. So the person who made it was Adolf Sax. He made it in 1846, and it also got patented that year. He played the flute and clarinet. His parents were instrument designers as well, and had worked on the design of the French horn. After leaving the Royal Conservatory of Brussels, he made changes to the bass clarinet as well right away. That was the first big thing he did. In 1842, he moved to Paris and started to work on a new line of bugles. These bugles paved the way to the flute and horn. So that's a little interesting thing. So during this time, he made the sax tromba, the sax horn, and the sax tuba. These instruments paved the way for the euphonium and many other baritone, different kinds of baritones and everything. They're very strange-looking instruments, but they're really cool. The sax, the sax tromba looks most likely like a baritone, which is actually kind of cool. On June 28th, 1846, he patented the saxophone, and by the end of the year, 1846, he had designed multiple different types of saxophones, ranging from the soprano to the subcontrabass. Yeah, that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing. And then he died in 1894 from pneumonia. And also, he was poor when he died, because there were multiple people that tried to call him out for his patent. I don't know, it's just an interesting fact about him. People sued him about 4 to 5 times about his patented saxophone, which is crazy to me. I can't believe that people would do that, but that's it. And then let's see. Okay, here we go. The ranges and the notes. All right. So on the left, on the top one, you can see that it's an E flat alto's range and the notes. So when we hear it played, you see that's a C. It's not the C, but it sounds like an E flat. And then the range of the actual sounds, so it goes from D on the bass clef, to a natural above alto tenor clef, I believe. Not great with my clefs. And then this is the B flat tenors range. So when you hear the C, it actually plays a B flat below the staff. So the range is the E flat on the staff of the bass clef, all the way, so the A flat on the bass clef, all the way to the E flat on the treble clef. So yeah. And then here's the range of the alto. So it goes from, with some modifications I've heard, you can hit this low A. But I believe from what people have told me, it takes some weird adjustments to be able to reach that. So usually it's just B flat all the way up to that, okay? So then about the saxophone and the parts of the saxophone. So due to the price difference, so this is just beforehand, before we get into the parts of the saxophone. This is a little information about it. So due to the price difference between the clarinet and the saxophone, some teachers will start students on the clarinet. Let's just let them get it into their mind before playing it. So basically it's saying that if they're trying to see if the student's gonna stay in band until they get to the saxophone. Because you don't want someone to buy a saxophone and then have them quit, because it's kind of like a waste of money. So having them start on the clarinet, which is a little bit cheaper, and getting their technique down before coming onto it allows them to be able to do that. And allows them to basically become comfortable, and for the teacher to see if they're dedicated to the instrument. So then students who also, this is perfect. This leads right on to it. So students who also are able to create a good sound on the clarinet, have a good technique, and theoretically, they would be able to play the saxophone and have a good sound on the saxophone. Theoretically, that is true. Some people have a harder time getting over to the saxophone because of the different change in the embouchure and the mouthpiece and stuff, but usually it's a pretty easy transition over, so it should be good. And then there aren't many physical restrictions, but the student's size may affect the positioning of their hands and make it harder for them to play. So for a student that has a very small student, it can be harder for them to be able to hold the instrument itself and be able to reach the notes. So they would have to curve their hand more around the instrument to be able to grab the notes and grab the keys. So having a bigger student would be better. But I've seen smaller students play the saxophone. It just takes a little bit of adjustment to just be able to play it. So then let's go over here to this part. Can you see this part? Okay, just making sure. Sorry, Christian's saying it. So as you can see up here, this is the mouthpiece. Usually there's a thing called a mouthpiece guard, which slides over it and that you put inside your case to make sure your mouthpiece doesn't get damaged. Some students like to leave on their reeds in their mouthpieces when they put them away. So that's another thing that's kind of protecting it, but usually they have some damage done to them. So after that comes the ligature. So the ligature is a small piece that attaches to the mouthpiece that holds the reed onto it. Got that? Okay, then we have the neck. The neck is this part. So this is the neck. So if we were to take this all apart, this would be the body, and this small portion up here is the neck. And then attached to the neck is the neck cork, which is the thing that holds, hold on. No, go back. Oh, no. So the neck cork. So the neck cork makes sure that the mouthpiece is held on nice and tight and snug. Now you want to always grease it up because you could always tear it apart because you didn't grease it up. It also has a higher chance of getting stuck on there if you don't grease it up. So next up we have the octave pin, which is this little lip up here. And then there's a lot more pieces to it, okay? You ready for this? So this main part is the body. The body has all the keys, everything that you need to do to move around on the instrument. So then these parts are the keys. This is where you would put your fingers. Like your 1, 2, like we call this 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, see? And so you would put your fingers along here, and along there, and along there. So then next up, we have the spatula keys. So the spatula keys are these little groups of keys that look like spatulas. So then you just slide your pinky across them to be able to reach them and be able to play them. Next up, we have the bell. So the bell is the thing that projects the sound the most. Usually whenever you play, you want to have it facing upwards or outwards, so your sound projects out. You don't want it facing right into the stand, because if you do, you'll sound muffled. Next up, we have the key guards and the tone holes. So the key guards and the tone holes are not really related, but just in case. So the key guard protects the lower keys, like these big ones, because they come out much more than the ones on the top. So you have to have this guard to make sure that they don't fling out too far. So it stops them and it makes sure that they are always in alignment. And then the tone holes are the things underneath the keys. They produce the sound as well as the bell. So then the bow or the bow is the bottom. As you can see along here, oh sorry, I moved the phone. Along the bottom, it's where you have another support to make sure that you are able to get the sound out of the instrument right away. It flows down and out. So this video, right now, I'm not going to show you this video. This is how to assemble it. So we're running out of a lot. We're kind of running out of time. So this is a 1 and 30-second long video that teaches you how to create the instrument and how to put it together. He teaches you how to make sure to tighten the ligature, tighten everything down. He tells you to grease it, everything, just really quickly. It's basically a really quick rundown, which is really helpful for you. So we're gonna just skip past it for right now. Oh, that's too far. So things to know. So during assembly, do not put pressure on the rods of the saxophone. So as you can see in that old picture I showed you, there were areas where there weren't keys. You want to try and grab that area, and then you want to try and get your your neck onto the instrument without grabbing the rods. If you bend the rods, it's going to be a whole issue. We don't want to do that, okay? You're going to make your parents spend a lot more money, okay? Excuse me. Make sure when putting the mouthpiece on, you put cork grease on it. Remember what I said? It might get stuck, it might tear it apart, it will ruin the cork. And make sure that you turn it in one direction. Do not turn the cork in any other direction except for one, because if you do, it has a higher chance of tearing the cork. So if you're having issues hitting the lower notes, but you are able to do the higher notes much easier, excuse me, the octave key might be bent out of place, or the pad might be a little swollen. So you might need to get that repaired, or a simple fix would be to put a rubber band around the octave key on the neck. So then we have, if your keys are bent or your pads are bad, you will need to go to a technician. This you can't really fix by yourself, and you need to have them repair it. It is costly, and that's why we make sure that we don't grab those parts, right? Because it's expensive, and if we can take steps to prevent that, then it will help us in the future and save us money in the future for an even better saxophone. So if you place your reed incorrectly, producing like the sound within the mouthpiece becomes very hard to make. If the reed is placed too far back on the mouthpiece, you might not be able to make a noise. That's a big issue. So you might need to move the mouthpiece forwards, and it might become easier to break. So secondly, if it's placed too far forwards, then you'll have a much harder time producing sound due to the smaller gap between the reed and the mouthpiece for the air to get through. You also might squeak a lot more. So if the ligature is also too tight or not in the correct position, creating a sound becomes an issue due to the ligature holding the reed. So there's another thing that we like to say within our band, where you don't want to choke out the reed. Like you can just tighten the ligature way too far down to where it doesn't even want to move. So you want to always make sure it's not super tight, because if you do, it might not make a sound at all. So saxophone positioning. So on the left, you can see the traditional position. Sorry for me shaking. So usually with beginners, they'll hold them off to the side because they're too small to put in the beginning. And they would usually be ending up looking up at the ceiling, and you don't want that. So you'll put them to the side to help them out. Usually smaller students will do this, along with some jazz players. So then the alternate position is usually for advanced players. So usually once you get a little bit bigger and a little bit older, it becomes easier to hold in the middle. So thus you can keep it in the middle, and you can sometimes switch from side to side. Depends on the preference, but usually people want you to play in the middle like this, the alternate position. So, but people tend to use both, just on and off. Next up, more things you need to know. So make sure when you're holding the instrument, you don't move the bottom too far back. If the bottom is too far back, your breathing will be restricted, and it will affect your fingering technique as well, okay? So make sure when you play, you don't lean your head forwards or slouch. If you do lean your head forwards or slouch, your airway will become restricted, just like the first one. Excuse me. As well as affecting the position of the instrument and the technique needed to play. So the farther you lean forwards with your head down, the harder it is for you to play, and the harder it is for you to do more techniques. So then finally, make sure that your neck strap is high enough that when you rest your thumb on the lower thumb rest, the instrument goes straight into your mouth. If it's above or below, then you need to adjust the strap, okay? Because if you don't, what's it called? You might be holding the instrument up, and it will strain your arm. So you want to make sure that it's not too high or too low, because if it's also too high, you'll have to look up to play into it. You don't want that. That's very common. These two things are very common for people to go through. So right hands. So this is going to deal with the last part of this. So I have your right hand. I don't have my saxophone with me, but for your right hand, it would go on the bottom of the horn. So there's a little thumb rest, as you can see, that you would slide your thumb right into that would hold it. And then there's 4 buttons. That's 4 big buttons, okay? So you'll go 1 on the top one, 2 on the middle one, 3 on the lower one, and then 4 on the 2 paddles on the bottom. So as you can see, we have these little, here, I'll get a little bit closer. We have these little side pieces. I'll get into them in a little bit. But with these, you're gonna have to move your hand a little bit more and out of its normal position to be able to play them. So to be able to play like a B flat or different notes using alternate positions, you're gonna have to move your hand out of its place. Sometimes you use your palm, or sometimes you just have to move your hand to get it completely. Sometimes you have to just straighten out your fingers and just let it rest on it. So left hand positioning. So on the top of the instrument, there is a black circle where you will put your left thumb. And then around the front, there will be 3 big buttons. So you'll do 1 on the top button, 2 on the middle button, 3 on the lower button, and then 4 would go on those paddles. Remember from earlier, those paddles? So then you would put your pinky on those paddles. So then when you go to play different notes using those paddles, you could just roll your pinky across it. So along with this, just like at the bottom, there was this little alternate or higher notes. So with this, again, you would have to take your hand out of its normal position and slide it up and use the pads of your hands along here. Sorry, this is weird doing it with my phone in my hand, but I'm pointing to, hold this real quick. You would have to use this part of your hand or this part of your hand to be able to play those notes. So you'll have to move your hand out of its normal position to get to those notes. So finally, movements outside of the normal hand position, like I was saying before. So for these notes in particular, you have to move your hands out of the normal positions. So for B flat 5 and B flat 6, C5, high E, high D, high E flat, high F, and low B flat, you will all have to move your hands out of their normal positions. It seems scary now, but once you start it, it becomes really easy. So welcome to saxophone.